Hello and welcome here to FabCity Now. This is a new podcast where we're diving into all of the ideas and projects and people necessary to achieve this really grand vision of becoming a Fab City, which is a city that produces everything that it consumes. There's a lot of facets that are involved in this idea, and I'm actually really happy today to be coming from northern Michigan. I'm on an RV trek across the country with my family at the moment, and I'm here with a friend, Greg Howes, who I have known for probably 14 years, something in that ballpark. And actually, Greg is the person responsible for turning me on to all of this Fab Lab, fabrication, digital fabrication, this whole thing that has been now become my focus and my career for the last 10 years or so. So why don't you just give a brief introduction to yourself, Greg, and who are you, where are you, what do you do, and why do you care about digital fabrication?
Yeah, hi, happy to be here. I'm a builder and also I like technology, and what I do is essentially focus on construction. How do we use technology and how do we use the best tools, the best processes to make things? My particular focus is making buildings, but a lot of what we look at applies to making everything from automobiles, consumer electronics across the board. My journey is, again, being a builder, trying to figure out how to build better, than doing lots of years of research in the US and also in Europe, where I lived for many years. But we're all trying to solve similar problems. We want quality products, we want scalable systems, we want it to be green, we want it to be energy efficient, resource efficient. And my journey has showed that a lot of the problems are being addressed, I think, a lot in Germany, Switzerland, Austria, where they have a big culture focused on manufacturing, focused on using a lot of robotics and a lot of software, and essentially building the systems that build things. And
I want to pause you on that for a second. That actually sounds a lot like what Elon Musk is doing. I actually read an article recently about the true value and potential of what Tesla is building is not the building of an automobile. It's the building of the system that builds the automobile. It's the factory. It's the making the factory be the machine. And so it's really kind of looking at the macro of how do you assemble a factory that then assembles things.
Exactly. I think that's the key value. I think his quote was, the key is to figure out how to make the things that make things, and essentially create those systems. He showed he had all the unlimited demand for his automobiles, but how to efficiently scale up production and make them. He too has hired a lot of researchers and people out of Germany for this exact same reason. And ultimately, it isn't just selling transportation or automobiles, it'll be the systems. Steve Jobs is another one. When he had Next, when he was away from Apple, he also was quoted as saying, "I'm as proud of my factory as I am of the product." And even looking at the current leader of Apple, his background was all in logistics and supply and manufacturing. So that is critical skill to essentially complement the great design, great marketing. Yeah, I think these same lessons are relevant to many industries. How do we drop the price of goods, raise the quality, and you have to build systems in order to do that.
Right. It's focused on the systems, and just kind of finishing out on that Elon Musk comment is that a different article that I read actually said that he has partnered up with, I believe it was a German company, to produce COVID-19 vaccines. And Tesla has nothing to do with kind of the bio side of the world, yet the reason why they're collaborating is because they understand how to build the factory, how to build the system that makes the things.
Elon Musk too, he's opening up the new plant in Berlin, and that has gone really impressed Germany because he's using a lot of this prefabrication systems thinking, and he's proceeding with building out the factory at a record pace. So again, eating his own dog food, proving it, and essentially same thinking applied in a different context.
So one of the things that has been, I don't know, interesting yet also frustrating for me is when I had first met you, you were kind of screaming at the industry, saying there's a better way to do things. Why are we still doing things this way here in the United States when there are keen examples of how this is being done more efficiently and more systemically in other countries? It's really surprised me as how old some of these CNC robots are, or the software that that's being used to design buildings that are coming out of Germany or Switzerland. As far as you know, what is the oldest, either like timber CNC machine or the software that that you use to design for it? Like what's kind of the oldest reference you have?
The oldest reference, and I'm going to miss the guy's name. He essentially, in the 1940s, came up with the idea like we need to use systems and machines to craft and cut and make airplane parts. In this case, particularly out of wood, and his factory was Traverse City, 40 minutes away. He did that in the 1940s, and he was successful. Obviously, it was very early days for CNC and certainly for software. He then went to MIT, 1961, 62. They essentially kind of told him, you're not smart enough to do this, so we're going to do it. And they kind of did, but they also didn't. At the same time, you had Ivan Sutherland, so the Sketchpad, inventing design software, CAD software, same period, about 1962. And then you had the CAM CNC evolving more quickly, of course, in the 60s. But how come these worlds haven't merged more? So we're going further with design software and communicating, collaborative, multiple user, and then also how do we hook that up to the machines?
Well, it's interesting that Autodesk, I think it's 5 years ago or so, something like that, that made a shift to care about this, to care about how their design software actually communicated with machines in the first place. And it took them, I don't know, it took them what, 25 years of existence to really be concerned with it. And now that they do care about it, they're very aggressive in making sure that their software talks to machines well.
That's completely, and then Andrew Anagnos is really big focus on industrialized construction. The former CEO, also Carl Bass, talked about connecting both sides of the screen. Ultimately, what you want to do, how do we can share all this design stuff, we put it in the cloud, we can do all these great things, but you have to offer the design community a way to get the things made, to get manufacturing connected. And that is a massive, massive task, but the global CAD market is only about $10 billion annually. And you look at the construction market, let's just say it's 12 trillion, or Autodesk had a book, The Future of Making. They said it's a $30 trillion market annually making things.
Right.
So Autodesk, if they can offer their existing customers a shorter link to manufacturing, the Autodesk could become a $1 trillion company or much larger. But the challenge is that there are so many kinds of CNC machines, and the robotics are, obviously there's all that growth, but there's not enough people that can code the machines, that can tell the machines how to make things efficiently. Construction is particularly challenged because one could argue every building is a prototype, or every building is unique because it's in a unique location.
Right.
And so it's a really tough industry compared to the automation, like say electronics or cell phones, or even cars. We're going to make hundreds of thousands of a Toyota Camry model, or we're going to make airplanes, we can sell them for a very high price. But when it comes to housing, it's a much bigger challenge. The industry is extremely fragmented. It hasn't had historically much use of technology. There's a lot of reasons for that. But the opportunity is so vast because we need to build a new Manhattan every month.
Sure.
Housing demand, all those billions. Like, how are we going to do it? I mean, how do we essentially deliver that? And how do you use fewer resources to do it? So you save on materials, and you empower builders, and you're even empowering the consumer by making faster, better, cheaper building possible. And it's not just an individual tool, it's one piece of software or one kind of machine, it's the whole system. And that's essentially a lot to take on. And then the buildings vary. The regulatory environment is so different, even within the U.S., even within individual states, and then globally. But I think the reason I really focused on Europe is markets that are highly regulated, really expensive. Energy is expensive, labor is expensive. Those countries are forced to look at technology.
You're forced to do things in the most efficient way possible.
You've got to do it. You can't say I can just throw more cheap labor at it. No, you've got to figure out ways to raise productivity in every industry. And that's why Germany is, again, they have manufacturing comprises a big part of their whole economy. And even Angela Merkel, the head of Germany, politically has stated, like, I call it Industry 4.0, but Germany can stay ahead and lead the world if it continues to develop technologies for making things. And that's all automation and software.
So as far as the oldest reference of CNC that that I was looking for is actually looking at CNC as it applies to the construction industry.
Oh, CNC as applies to construction.
Whether it be when Hundinger was first established, or any of these other softwares that are helping to drive those machines.
Yeah, I mean, let's look at steel. How much are we automating the manufacturing of steel? That's been automated for many, many decades, increasingly so. But I think it begs definition. What are we talking about specifically?
I'm really looking for, like, when a timber CNC machine was first being commercially used, and really just trying to draw the reference of, like, hey, look, in Germany they've been doing it for 40 years, and America seems to have just, like, been waking up in the last 5 years that this is even possible. Yeah,
okay. Construction is such a big industry. I can't have a comprehensive knowledge, so I can only really speak about wood. And I'll speak even specifically about mass timber, big wood. Not how do we make 2x4s more efficiently. Weyerhaeuser has really automated the production of commodity wood products, but they haven't reached into how do we automate the custom manufacturing of buildings beyond just a commodity. Yeah, in Germany, again, in Switzerland, very high labor cost, and also they're contributing to the automotive. It was in the 80s where it really happened, that really blew up. And actually, it started in Switzerland in the 70s when the Japanese were bringing really inexpensive watches in, and the Swiss luxury watch market said, how are we going to compete against these really competitive Japanese watches? And that's when the company Swatch came on. So a high fashion, really expensive, really accurate watch, really, really cheap. And the way they achieved that was all through automation and robotics. And it really changed the entire Swiss industry. They still have the $100,000 watch, but they also were able to produce cost competitively really inexpensive watches, like the $100 watch, a very high quality. And that led out into other fields within Switzerland, and then southern Germany, which is where they're kind of automotive hub. So you have that nucleus leading in the 80s to CAD CAM software. So software not only for CAD, but software that essentially could talk to the machines and had machines interfaces from the design software. That's, again, like we use CADWork. There are competitors, HSB CAD, BOMA, CIMA, almost all of them European. And they were able to do that. They have a competitive advantage because if you have a small community and some of the people are making the machines and other companies are making the software that talks to those machines, obviously they can continue to iterate and develop that. They've been since the 80s. So you've now got tens of thousands of people working on that, and the whole industry is more mature there. People are familiar with design for manufacturing assembly. They can look at the data and the models and they understand them. They've been working for decades, and they can go to a conference, let's say like Ligna, which is Latin for wood, and that'll attract 93,000 people just looking at technology and wood. And so you can say the industry, there's already, let's say, millions of people that are at least familiar with high degrees of automation in building with wood.
So for roughly the last 40 years, CNC and automation and construction in Europe has existed. and the last 30 has probably become more commonplace.
It has become commonplace. Another place that really was at the forefront of prefab, not as much automation, is Sweden. After World War II, they wanted to figure out how do we make a lot of housing, and we're also a very expensive market, labor, and it's also cold. But they really drove, let's call it prefab in a factory after World War II. So prefab for single family homes was over 50% market share in the 1950s.
Mm-hmm.
So think of that, about 70 years ago.
Right.
And they continue to do it today. One would argue maybe they don't have as much automation as the Swiss and Germans and Austrians, but they do have companies like Randeck Bautech, which is a wood CNC machine, and IKEA working with Skanska. They're really iterating on prefab homes, a project called Boklok, B-O-K-L-O-K. They're not in the US market yet, they're in the UK and in the Nordic countries, but they're at the forefront, I think, of automation there.
Mm-hmm.
Similar problem, expensive, highly regulated market. How do we build faster, better, cheaper?
Do you think that the reason, or one of the primary reasons why it hasn't been so pushed so heavily in the US and so adopted so heavily in the US is because we don't have the same, we had cheap labor, we had cheap resources, cheap energy?
I would argue on average our labor has been cheaper. I also think the companies have tried this in the US. Obviously they're continuing to try. The challenge is there aren't the people to hire. So a lot of the existing construction industry, and right now it's going great guns, people are making a lot of money building in the conventional way. There's a shortage of people. But I don't think the primary constraint to this is no one's really proved that in the US market specifically, at any significant scale, you can be successful with a high level of automation. And even large construction companies, billion-dollar construction companies that want to go this way, the people aren't there in the US with the experience to do it. Yeah. I'll give you an example. Pulte Homes had a lot of automation in Manassas, Virginia in about 2006 and 7, and they were going to do a big push to automation, yet they went bankrupt before the first housing crash in 2008, and they weren't successful. So how could, during a housing boom, multi-billion-dollar company, why were they not successful?
Yeah, right.
And the argument, I would say there again, they made the mistake of trying to produce the same homes they were already producing, but doing it in a factory. And I think in my opinion, they should have well, what does the kind of homes does the factory produce well? And what does automation make easier? And do more of that research rather than saying, well, this is what we do, so now we're going to try to do that, but in a factory.
Well, and I just want to pause for a second. For anybody who's joining us now, you're on FabCity now. I'm Danny Beesley, and this is Greg Howes, and we're really diving into automation in the construction industry, better ways of building, and really we're kind of going into a bit of history of why we don't see a lot of it in the U.S. Now, just kind of going back, and this is another Elon Musk reference, but when he was first building out the first gigafactory in Fremont in California, there was a really hard push for automate everything. Really want to try to automate as much as humanly possible, or robotically possible. And in fact, they did a ton of automation in the factory, and numerous things weren't working.
Correct.
And it's primarily because those processes didn't yet exist. So they were being invented in that factory on demand. And so there were a bunch of naysayers against Tesla, which, apparently when you're successful, you get a lot of haters that show up, that were, basically saying look, he failed. He didn't automate it to the extent that he promised. And we're seeing failures in the line, and they're not getting production numbers around. And they actually stopped the line or paused the line to pull out some of that automation.
Yes.
To get to just put it to the side for the time being. And I think it's purely just a temporary thing. It's a way to move it forward, just temporarily at the moment. And so yeah, and it makes sense because not everything makes sense to automate today.
No, certainly. I read
concentrate on the right things rather than the wrong things.
Exactly. And what's the best tool for the job? You can be too in love with technology and automation where it doesn't make sense to automate certain things. I do want to bring up Japan too. Japan has really done prefab and a lot of automation. Think Toyota Homes, Panasonic Homes. There's a multi-billion-dollar company called Sekisui. Sekisui is focused on housing. They're extremely automated. They're doing amazing stuff. But those technologies have not moved really from Japan to the US. They're primarily focused just on the Japanese market. Regarding technology and automation and going too far, I think one of the most careful companies of really doing a lot of analysis before they automate, again, is the IKEA Skanska Bo-Kluk project. I mean, IKEA has the money, right?
Sure.
They have billions of dollars they could throw at this. Because they're in all of the furniture business, they're deeply embedded in global markets. So for them, it's almost an easy one, but they iterate slowly and grow slowly and add automation after they're sure it's an appropriate tool or process.
Right, which is, it's a different perspective from Tesla, which is kind of build fast and break things.
Exactly.
Because we just got money yesterday and we gotta produce cars, next week. Versus when you have the luxury of time, when you've got plenty of financial runway, when there's a budget there for automation that is specifically just for moving that one aspect a little bit further along, step by step.
Well, they're more careful. I think a lot of the European companies, again, I lived in Europe for 7 years. My wife is from Finland, worked with Stefan, he's Swiss. Careful steps as they iterate. And it's a very different approach than the American one, that we often see in the tech industry. Will throw billions of dollars after an idea and be like, I think also Tesla's digitally native. They changed everything. So the direct marketing of the cars as opposed to dealerships and all of the software. And IKEA, you can say they missed the window of online marketing. They're doing really cool things now, but they were kind of late to that game. And then I would also say a lot of the very large German, Swiss, and Austrian companies in home building, prefab, wood, are essentially family-owned businesses, privately held. They're very successful. They're doing well, and they scale slowly because they're already successful in their home markets, and they are not taking the approach of let's raise billions of dollars and go attack a new market. No, I think they want to retain 100% control of their companies. Understandable, but it makes it really difficult to enter a new market like the US because you can't retain all the control and knowledge in Europe and then say we're going to enter the US market.
Well, right, because they're almost two completely different markets. The way that they're regulated, I'm guessing, but I'm assuming that there's a little bit more collaboration on building codes and permitting and things like that throughout Europe than there is in the United States.
Yeah, that's
maybe not something that makes the most sense in the world, but more so than the United States.
Well, they kind of
less fragmented than the United States.
Yeah, it's hard again to speak comprehensively because I have very limited knowledge, but we have been there a lot and talking to them. They do. I mean, if a lot of companies want to grow, they have to go across the EU. Construction hasn't traveled as much across borders. For simple reasons. Let's say a company in Germany, a lot of my talk are like, we have all the work we will ever need in Germany to go to another market in another language with a different regulatory environment. We don't need it. We should just try to capture more market share in Germany before we're going to say we're going to go after Poland or France. So the majority of the companies, and I was just in Innsbruck in December for a event called Holzbau, which is German for building with wood. There were 2,350 people there, but only 25 Americans. So again, it's kind of shocking that Americans aren't more interested.
Well, it's just a matter of being curious. How is it done in other places? Because there's a lot you can learn from just seeing the way that companies are structured, the problems they're tackling, how they're tackling them.
Don't reinvent the wheel. I think that's another problem with construction. People say it's maybe it's not relevant because it's in another country. but I think most of the challenges are common around the world.
Right.
Similar problems, and I think don't reinvent the wheel. Try to find people who've already solved that problem,
Right.
and then bring that solution to your market.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So, for me, after I had met you, there was, a flurry of activities in 6 different directions. But I think, for me, what has been the most beneficial has just been the introduction to a better way of building things. Mm-hmm. That's really been primarily the best benefit that I've gotten, is just knowing that there is a better way. Mm-hmm. And today, I nor you, I think, know what is the best way, because it's not really about finding the best way to do things, because it's evolving daily. So it's a matter of just being curious and thirsty for understanding what are the best ways of producing things, and more specifically housing, which is the greatest relevance of this conversation.
It's true, because the companies making, let's say, Airbnb and KUKA robots, and we've had them at events I've helped organize, high-level people from those companies. They look at construction and say it's too small of an industry, robotics, to be really of interest to us. So we're not going to invest resources in software for the robotics. The construction industry has to do it itself. You then have CNC companies, let's say Hundeger or Cruzy or Randeck Bautech, Weinmann. They are specifically focused on CNC machines for the building industry. They get it. They're investing the resources, but there's still those companies. Then I talked to them again in Europe again in December. They're going great guns, and even right now, if you wanted to buy a lot of these CNC machines, they're back ordered. Mm-hmm. Like Hundeger's, like, it depends which one you buy, like a year and a half. Hmm. So even if you wanted one, or even if you wanted to use one, they're expensive. The problem also is, even if you buy the machines and you have, let's say you've got hundreds of millions of dollars or $1 billion, that's only solving like 10% of the problem, because you don't have the people to run the factory.
Right.
So if you've got all the best machines in the world, and then the design community is sending you, let's call it CAD data or BIM data, mm-hmm. just data to make buildings, but they don't have experience designing for manufacturing and assembly, they're not familiar, most of the efficiency is lost.
Right, because everyone in that line of production doesn't actually understand how to use the machines properly, how to design for them in the first place.
Yeah, and I want to reference IKEA as a model too, because IKEA, with their designers, they said, look, we want you to design this product. Let's say it's a lamp for $7, but we're going to retail it for $7. Now, you designer, you need to come up with a design for the lamp. But when you're coming up with a design, you have to figure out how we can put that on the shelf for $7 per unit.
Right.
Or some other low piece. So they have to do all that homework.
It's a wonderful constraint. I mean, it's been way too many times, especially dealing with academia, where people are told there are no limits. You get to go, your dreams, whatever you can think of is the limit of what you should be designing right now. And that's great for your first activity, but not for the second or every single one after that, because every single project you get is never going to be, there are no restraints. There's no limitations on this. It's best to give people the box up front, so that they're making decisions that fit in that box at the end of the day.
Correct. I agree completely, because a lot of, let's say, our training of architects now, we want great buildings, we want that great design, but there's always constraints. It's called building regulation. There are building codes.
Right. And
there are costs. You don't have infinite budgets, so you have finite resources. You have finite budgets, and so you've got to figure out. You have to consider these things in your design, because another reason is everybody wants to be a star architect. A lot of architects, like, I want to design whole cities or do great buildings, and I don't want to have a budget. The problem is 99% plus of architects are not going to be working on the biggest buildings.
That's the Michael Jordan.
The Michael Jordan, the superstars.
Exactly. It's not the everybody. It's not even the everybody who gets to play in the game. They get to play in the NBA. They're not the ones that really get to guide their destiny that way.
And then I look at this, in the whole world, the 90+% of buildings are not designed by licensed architect. They're not. In the US, we've got like a little over 100,000 registered architects. In Europe, they have over 500,000. But then look at a country like China, where there is not an architect. There are fewer than one for every 10,000 people. Or look at India, or look at Russia. So I don't know, let's throw a rough number out there, because architectural accreditation is different in many countries. But let's just say there are 1 million architects in the world, just as an example, registered in different ways. That's not very many people on a planet of 7 billion. We're going to make this new city assignment every month.
And when you look at the amount of construction that's happening,
and even if you pass the law, like, okay, for every building in the world, there has to be a licensed architect designing it. There's not enough architects, and they don't have enough time or knowledge. So this adds to the reason why you have to build the building systems.
Right. Because if you can,
that's where the efficiency will come from.
Yeah, because you're not getting it from the talent side, or you're not getting it from these other places. I just want to pause again. Right now, you're listening to FabCity Now. We're digging into how do you go about producing everything that you consume locally. And right now we're talking with Greg Howes, and we're really diving into doing this with buildings. And we haven't gotten to the point of localization where we're actually trying to source all the materials locally. But it's really kind of unpacking how do we build buildings, or how do we build the systems better, so that we are increasing the efficiency as much as possible in how we produce these things, how we build them. Tackling the materials standpoint, I think is a totally different thing, because right now every building has parts from all over the world. It's pretty common that you bring an Italian tile imported to do your floor. So I don't know how deep into localization we're gonna get in this conversation, but we're just kind of
let's go there. Let's go there. I mean, here's my objective with wood. The U.S. imports and exports more wood than any other country in the world. The biggest industry to use wood is construction. 90% of Americans live in a wood frame building. Our factory is in Oregon, which is the biggest wood producing state in the US. Second is Washington. So my goal is like, well, how do we use local wood to serve the local market using the best technologies, the most efficient building systems in the world? That's our whole objective. And I don't want to do that as just one company. There has to be a whole supply chain.
Sure.
There are literally rooms for hundreds of thousands, if not millions of companies building better, faster, and cheaper. My focus is doing that with wood, using the best tools, the best processes from anywhere in the world to serve the US market, and specifically the US West Coast, using a local sustainable material, wood, which we have a lot of, and we also have an extreme housing shortage. So we should build better, faster, cheaper, use far fewer resources. If we're going to use something like wood, let's use technology to make the wood stronger, to add to its capabilities. I'll give you an example. This glue laminate, a glue lam, as opposed to a solid timber. All you're doing is essentially laminating multiple layers of wood. And what you're doing is you're able then to build bigger, more structurally sound buildings from the simple application of that technology. We can think of Weyerhaeuser products, LVL, other engineered wood products, and through processes we're able to use less wood but add strength to the wood. And then the new hot one is CrossLaminated Timber. These big sandwiches, just think of it as really thick plywood with thick layers. Using technology, we can then use wood more efficiently, and we can make it stronger. We can use lower grade woods,
right? Because
for higher purposes.
A lot of the beetle kill pine and all this other stuff that's been infested. You couldn't do a traditional stick frame house out of that because it's not structurally sound. But if you take that and laminate that into a giant sheet, it is structurally sound in there. So it's kind of waste wood that would be going, right back to Mother Nature directly if we weren't coming up with new technologies on the way to assemble it.
Exactly. So you can do more with the same wood. because you're using a system. And also, you can do it at a scalable level because you have a system that you can do more, and it's local. So we're in the localization phase. Construction is really local everywhere. A lot of it is relationship dependent, and the build, no one company is going to do everything on construction, and they may do lots of things for their own building, but the largest production builders in America, let's say Centex, D.R. Horton, and Pulte, they primarily, most of them outsource the actual building of the buildings to third parties.
They're marketing companies.
They're marketing companies, they acquire land, they do that, but they don't do most of the actual building themselves, so they're not investing in that because it's not what they do.
Right, whoever raises their hands and they can do it for the cheapest is when they get the job usually.
Exactly, and there's a big legal contractual framework around that.
Right.
I'm a big focus and fan of localization and making locally, and the way to do that cost competitively and use local resources is use the very best tools available, whatever you're making.
Well, it makes things more complicated when you really try to push it into this local paradigm, because yes, up in the Pacific Northwest, it makes total sense to build out of wood, but in Arizona, like you need totally new systems, and as you jump around this country, let alone the world, like you're gonna find something in Arizona that you might be able to use as raw material, but you go to Florida and you need something else entirely.
Exactly, you're not going to build, let's say, for example, in Dubai, out of wood. It just doesn't make sense there, and there isn't wood available locally. Most of Europe, 90% of the buildings are from concrete. Scandinavia has a higher percentage because they have wood, but it's the norm. It's what people are accustomed to. And then you have the tropical environments where wood has other problems, which it doesn't work. But in the US, because we have a long tradition of building with wood and it is a local material, it shouldn't be the only thing we build out of. I'm a big fan of people building with steel, concrete, or even doing it more, but doing it more efficiently.
Right. So
use less of that material. And as we both know, we work in digital fabrication. We know people at the forefront of composites, like Bill Chrysler or Bill Zahner with metals. And when we talk to people using other materials and pushing automation, 90% of our problems and how we're trying to get there are the same. It's just a different material. And the machines do what they're told. And many of the machines can work with multiple materials, but you still need to be able to tell them what to do to do it efficiently.
You need the people who have the knowledge to tell them what to do in the first place.
And I would argue that's our biggest constraint.
Well, and I mean, I think it's our biggest constraint across the board. And, one of the motivators that I've seen, or the drivers of the cost of housing is the lack of labor. And the lack of labor comes from the lack of education creating labor in the first place. When we saw shop class start to disappear, that's when we also were seeing a contraction in labor availability for producing houses. And there's a number of reasons why the cost of housing goes up, but when you don't train people to swing a hammer, and you need people who know how to swing a hammer to build a house, it just becomes more expensive.
Yeah, that's really another big difference between Europe. Again, in Germany, apprenticeships are very, very common, as are trade schools. And they have, at the universities, also in Scandinavia, my wife's nephew is going through construction management training in Finland right now. And also, so people have more formalized apprenticeships training in the trades. People don't move very much in Europe compared to the US. And all the countries have less population than we do. So people are more stable, don't move, tend to work at companies very many years or their entire career, as compared to the US, where people change jobs all the time. People move all the time. Think of contractors and subcontractors. You're working with this group team on this building. You work in the next building, it's an entirely new team. So, and then there isn't investment in training people, the trades?
Well,
There's not that much.
well, I actually think that there's a lot of investment, but none of it's really dealt with systematically. There's a ton of money that goes into workforce development. There's a ton of money in like training programs and teach people how to swing a hammer and all this other stuff. But the biggest problem that I've seen is that most of that is investment. It's band-aids to the system. Because you don't just throw all your money at them like, oh, well, we need more carpenters and electricians in the world. So let's start to try to find some people on the street and convince them that it's a good career for them to go into, which is great and valuable. But why don't you just go invest in the educational system appropriately in the beginning so that we continue to put out carpenters and electricians? Because as we know, we're going to continue to produce more things. We're going to continue to grow. And consumption is going to continue to happen and likely grow dramatically too. So we need the people who can produce the things. Like it's not like we're going to not need more carpenters in the future. And if we were training them 20 years ago, yes, we're looking at how do we train someone to be a carpenter and really like fit that narrow niche of a trade for their lifetime. So we're not giving them well-rounded skills, but we can train someone to become a carpenter and also run a CNC machine and also run a CAD model and all, like having these other tangential skills that stack up on there, giving them exposure to working with metal, giving them exposure to working with concrete, giving them exposure to working with these other things, so that you now have a well-rounded person. That yes, maybe today their job is swinging a hammer, but because they know how to run a machine and because they know how to design something or at least understand the design software, they're so much more versatile because as we change what we build, well, guess what? It's very likely coming off of the damn machine in the first place. Right. We already know how to run the machine, so we're just using a different material as an input rather than a whole new system. And that's the way we should be training people, is giving them this well-rounded exposure to the way in which things are made. Right. And then, yes, give them a deep dive into being a carpenter, being an electrician, being a welder, etc. But what I'm seeing is, especially with the Fab Labs, is that there's a ton of versatility. So, like, I have numerous people that are out there working in industry that have come through the Fab Lab. That it's the diversity of knowledge. It's the knowing how to weld, knowing how to do woodworking, knowing how to model, knowing how to do cam work, knowing how to laser cut, knowing how to do 2D graphics, and swing a hammer, know all your right tools, know how to use them safely, all of those skill sets. It's the diversity of that makes them extremely versatile. And beyond that, I've got a guy right now who's working for Mighty Buildings, which is a 3D printed house company based in Oakland, California. And he was essentially hired on as their lowest guy on the totem pole. And because of the exposure that he's gotten through me, through working for me, through working in the Fab Labs, he's the guy he's now like their safety lead for the entire factory. And this is a 21-year-old kid. He's safety lead for the entire factory, and he's out there sourcing materials. He's out there sourcing new product. He's out there filling in holes in their production chain of custody. He's finding new contractors that the company doesn't know who they are yet, and he has this very versatile skill set with knowledge on how to run a 3D printer, just doing it at scale. And that's the door opener. It's like, oh, when you get in the door because you've ran 3D printers before and you know enough about fabrication, we can train you to run this machine, and we feel confident you won't break it. Right. But it's this whole range of other diverse skill sets that is now making him very valuable. And once a week I get a text message from him like, hey, I'm looking for this random connection. A videographer out there? Hey, we want to bring in local furniture producers into our open house. Can you know any companies? Like, just having knowledge of like how to get things done. Like, there's a bunch of problems. Go solve them.
No, I think that's invaluable. People who get exposure through a Fab Lab or working to design software, various kinds of design software, then you have to problem solve where you're trying to make different products. So if those people, like the person you're referencing, can become problem solvers, looking at the whole chain, here's what we need to produce, here's all the design, here are the materials, and they have to put together those teams and be successful. Those are invaluable, those kind of people, and those skills are relevant to manufacturing in general.
Well, they're relevant to every job in general. Like, I feel fairly confident that this guy that I'm referencing could pick up and go work for a software company. Could pick up and go work somewhere else, because it's the problem solving mindset that is what makes them valuable. It's like, okay, once you solve a big diversity of problems, a new problem is just a problem that you need to unpack to figure out how to
It's what you do.
Right. It's what you do rather than be like, no, I only know wood. So if you're asking me a question about metal, I'm sorry, I'm ignorant. It's getting away from that altogether, this siloed thinking and siloed training.
We come completely, because there's a global shortage of advanced manufacturing workers, and that problem is exploding across many, many industries. So people with those skills, let's call it technology-driven manufacturing, there's insatiable demand for them.
Well, and I'm still dealing with a bit of a battle. I had a conversation with a group, community organization recently that was, wanting to get into doing job training in construction skills and building and construction skills. And, and I really said, like, okay, well, we should be pushing and promoting automation and robotics in that as much as possible. And there's the concern, like, oh yeah, but it's going to take all the jobs. I'm like, I know. So don't you want your people to get the jobs?
Oh, that's a good reply.
You need, right. Like if you do not invest in this, you're not going
to be competitive.
Right, you're not going to be relevant. Like, yes, there's going to be a good number of jobs where people know how to swing a hammer and fix your toilet. Right. The robot's not coming to fix your toilet.
Yeah, there's so many jobs. There's insatiable demand for that.
There's that, but do you always want to be the person with limited opportunity, or do you want to get thoroughly trained up and say, okay, well, this is where the boat is going, so let's get prepared and positioned for this? Because not only can you get a job, you can thrive. You have an ability to thrive, giving you those skills necessary to really thrive, and not being concerned about, oh my God, the robots can take the jobs. Like, they kind of are. But if you just learn how to program robots, you'll have a job.
Correct. I argue too, when people push back and say technology is a threat. No, technology is an enabler. Right. And it's the only way we're going to build enough buildings is creating more tools for builders like me to use. Mm-hmm. It is the answer. And if we don't do it, we're going to end up importing our buildings from countries that are further ahead in doing this.
Well, and I'm going to hop in here again. We'll wrap this up in about 15 minutes. But
okay.
You're listening to FabCity now with Danny Beesley, and I'm interviewing Greg Howe today on housing and construction, and how we bring about this FabCity vision through housing and construction. But something you had just mentioned there about the creating new tools. I saw this really cool tool, and I like tools. I like technology. I like, they're toys essentially for adults a lot of times. But it's a very simple thing about the size of a cell phone that was a stair tread measuring device. That's all that it does. Just measure stair treads. Mm-hmm. And you literally, you just take it and you set it on the stringer, and it's measuring the parallelogram shape of the tread that fits in there exactly, and it will give you it'll give you the blueprints of that geometry by just putting this device in there, and it measures it, and then now you have the exact dimensions, the exact angles on the sides, and it really fills in all of that information. And I was like, okay, I don't need that because I don't build enough stairs, mm-hmm. but somebody who does that once every 6 months, having a tool like that costs you $100 is actually worth it.
Yeah, exactly. I think they were seeing this automation. I just did countertops, and some of the best custom countertops in a remodel. They're just coming in and measuring things with lasers. Right. Everything.
Well,
and then they go custom manufacture.
Traditionally, has been they come in with sticks of glue on and hot glue.
Exactly. And I've seen that. There's still a lot of people doing it that way.
Of that, and then take that away.
Exactly, and I've seen a lot of it. There are better tools that are better, faster, and cheaper.
Right.
And the companies that use them will thrive.
Well, because you need 3 guys to come in and do that glue-on template.
And then not break it, and hopefully it doesn't move a little bit.
Right. And now you need 1 guy to come in with a laser.
Exactly. And you can see many examples of that in products we use in the buildings, like the windows, mm-hmm. the doors, the cabinets. Many things are manufactured increasingly at scale and efficiently. But what we're looking, what about the building frame itself? Mm-hmm. So apply that same kind of thinking to the frame. Again, back to do it locally, use the best tools. Big challenge, but infinite opportunity. Mm-hmm. And I would argue using these best tools and technologies is a competitive advantage, and it's really the only way we're going to be able to build enough buildings.
Mm-hmm.
People are retiring out. The talent is going away.
Well, because we have a couple of decades where we weren't training people, so it's nobody, it's not a wave of people replacing those that are retiring.
No, there's not, and that's why we see the incredible shortage of builders right now.
Mm-hmm.
It's getting worse. So how are we going to solve this problem?
Well, it's a huge question, and I don't have the answers, but I it's a problem I've been working on actively for years.
Mm-hmm.
Is how do you actually address the labor shortage? And at the end of the day, it's a matter of getting all of the educational institutions the hell out of the way. That's the problem. They stand in the way too much, because we don't have a lawyer shortage in this world, because being a lawyer is one of these like top tier professions that have been promoted. Like, you're going to be successful, you're going to become a doctor, a lawyer, and now it's a programmer is in that same list.
Correct.
But because we have law schools, we have lots and lots of law schools. We have these institutions that are purely dedicated to producing people with that particular skill set.
Correct.
And we have trade schools, yet in most parts of this country, like, if you use the word trade school, you're already getting ostracized. You're not allowed in the room because it's not the right terminology. I use vocation. I use vocational education a lot, and yet, 5 years ago, that was a phrase that would get me laughed out of the room. Like people will put up their fingers. We don't do vocation. It's about tracking people. It's about putting all of our black and brown students in the wrong pathway, and so they're only going to go up to become a carpenter. And it's this ostracizing of the professions, and it's like, but hold on, how many of you people live in a house? How many of you use electricity? How many of you drove here today?
Mm-hmm.
Like you don't realize that there's a ton of value in these things.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, yeah, kind of, I need the lawyer when I'm in trouble, but like, I don't need that every day, yet I turn on the light switch every single day.
Right.
And I need someone who understands how the systems behind that wall work.
And I know many plumbers and electricians, for example, that make extremely good living with in their profession, even with a very small business, even something that's working by themselves.
Mm-hmm.
They can earn extremely good living.
$120, $140 an hour.
Exactly. And it's a great gig. They earn a lot more than the median seller for an American. Mm-hmm. And the demand for what they do just continues to skyrocket.
And for me, that has been the biggest challenge is really just trying to re-educate the educators, because everyone who's in charge of making those decisions, not everyone, but nearly everyone, never did anything else with their life. I don't understand how a college counselor, whose job it is to coach people on going to college, but also careers that are a good fit for them, when they've never had a job. You've never had a career, yet it is your job to help people understand what they should do for a living. You're the worst person to give the advice, not the best person. I don't care how many years you spent in school, how many years it took you to get your counseling degree, which I'm sure you worked hard for, but you have no understanding of what it means to be a carpenter.
Correct.
Therefore, when someone comes to you and is actually a good fit to become a carpenter, you don't even have a clue. You don't know that that's even an opportunity. Right. The only who we should be allowing as career counselors is that guy or that girl who spent the last 30 years doing 30 different jobs. Right. Like, that's the person who is the best fit to give advice about what is good and what is not. Like, what careers are available and what you should and should not be doing with your life.
I completely agree. And the educational, even look like at the university level, it's not keeping up with the change of industry and technology. It changes slowly for the most part.
We just created a digital fabrication certification, the first in the state of California. So first state accredited digital fabrication certificate.
Okay, well done.
So it's a big to do, but it took us 3 years at the college level to write and get it passed locally, and another 6 to 9 months to get it passed at the state. So we're nearly 4 years into creating a degree. Mm-hmm. It's good, it's relevant, it's going to continue to have relevance, but the industry can shift in 6 months.
Correct.
And yet we're still looking at years for education to catch up to it. And it's really dumb, but it's kind of an unwritten rule is that you're not allowed to create new programming and curriculum at community colleges, at least in the state of California, maybe different in other states, that there isn't a demand for.
But that's reactive. It's
Well,
almost like
you're waiting for there to be a problem, and then you're stepping in, and it still takes you 5 years to develop a solution to that problem. When I've been pushing for years that for the last almost 3 years now that the College of Alameda go off and develop a robotics and automation program.
Mm-hmm.
And I just said this industry is coming, it's growing, it's going to get bigger, and I understand if you look around, you don't see it happening here, you don't see it in your backyard as much, but it really is. And yet it took this pandemic, whereas a month ago I feel the phone call of like, oh my God, we got to get this stuff off the ground right away. I was like, yeah, I didn't see the pandemic coming, but that industry was still on the rise. And now with the reality of the pandemic, yeah, automation and robotics are going through the roof right now because they're trying to get people physically out of the way.
Yep. No, that's really driving things, and hopefully that drives change at a faster pace in education and for training. I'm a little bit pessimistic, but I want it to help. I'm passionate about having that happen. Trying to figure out how. I too, for example, I spoke with a biggest construction training group in Washington State. Talked to their head department what we're trying to do, how more automation would be good. But I didn't have the head of the department say, "Look, Greg, right now there's such a demand for construction workers. We're teaching basic skills like show up for work on time."
Oh yeah. Well,
if we can get people to do that.
Yeah,
we feel successful. What you're talking about is so far beyond that, and we don't have qualified instructors to teach that.
No, we don't. I mean, at Laney College in Oakland, on multiple occasions, they've put out calls for faculty. Mm-hmm. There's an HVAC program they're hiring for. There's an electrical program they're hiring for, and they have to put out the calls like 3 times. Meaning they open it up, they have to get a minimum of 3 applicants in order to run through their hiring process. Mm-hmm. For an HVAC position, it took them 3 times of opening it up to find a person who's willing to do the work. And that really, the state of California is listening, because this has been a problem for years, and it's just been getting worse. And at least they're realizing it, and they're changing the requirements for teaching these teaching at a community college in the first place. In order to it's lowering the bar, but what is completely insane and ridiculous is like, but this guy just did this for 30 years, ran a successful company.
I don't think that's lowering the bar.
But well, no, that's not. But yeah, they're lowering the bar by eliminating the college requirements.
Yes.
Okay. For doing it, or dramatically reducing the college requirements for teaching. But it's the fact that you're using this metric that has nothing to do with the work that the person is doing, as what has kept so many people out of that pipeline in the first place. Mm-hmm. And so at least they're augmenting. I don't think that they've moved the needle far enough. They should really completely eliminate the requirement of a college degree. Mm-hmm. But I think it's so ideologically threatening to faculty that teach in these institutions. Like, wait a minute, hold on. If you don't need the thing that we tell everyone they need to come teach people how to do these things, then all of a sudden you need me anymore.
Correct. That's a threat to other people.
You're going to dilute the pool, and all of a sudden you're going to bring in the best qualified people, because just because you have a degree doesn't make you the best qualified person.
Correct.
But it made you the best qualified person because you had that degree. Everyone else in the candidate pool didn't have that.
Well, then those people have a best interest in maintaining the status quo and not opening up entry to a larger pool of differently qualified.
Right, because it should be entirely merit based, and I think that we're going to be getting closer to that reality in the near future, because I think with Facebook and Google and a number of other big tech companies have made a shift recently around their hiring practices. And really looking at merit based hiring practices. So they're not they're not looking at with the merit based, like skills based or competency based.
Correct.
So they're not concerned about the piece of paper that you have, or how many pieces of paper you have, or from what college you came from. Can you do the work? Can you prove that you can do the work? Mm-hmm. Oh, okay. And you taught yourself how to do all of this? You're actually more valuable than the person who had someone else teach them how to do it, because you figured out how to teach yourself how to do this thing. So you're actually better equipped to teach yourself how to do something else. Or as the industry evolves, you already have that skill necessary to do this.
Yes, sir. Those are more valuable skills. I'm hearing the same thing from the tech industry. They obviously don't have enough people, and so they're opening up to those wider pools. Yes, it's great to have that certification, but you don't need it if you can prove your competency.
Right. And I'm working on a variety of things that are, trying to meet people in the middle, give them validation of competency. So it's not quite the same certificate that said you put your head down and bared and grunted and dealt with this for 4 years and listened to how the other people think things should be done and then replicate that for them. And at least now you're getting a little bit of, okay, well here's a way to validate the skills that are learned. Not about the degree, not about paper. It's just here's a way that we can actually test and validate that this person has the skill.
Yeah, but it's very political when you're trying to measure competency. How do you measure that? So that
it's not an easy thing to measure, although it's a thing that I'm in my head. It is cracked and it is figured out, but on paper it is not there yet. So, but I'm working towards that. But we're here about the hour mark. I'm sure we can keep going, and we probably will after this is over. But I just want to thank everyone for watching. Greg and I have probably had similar conversations like this that have gone for hours and hours and hours that we've had over the last decade plus. But the world keeps changing, and I keep growing in my own direction. You keep growing in your own direction. So I think there's a lot of dynamic conversation to be had.
And the wonderful thing is the demand is only going up for the skills we're talking about, and it's only going to continue. So it's a great topic. The frustration can be that the pace of change isn't going as quickly as we would both like. Right.
Well, and I'm busy building something that lives outside of the educational system that I've been supporting for the longest time. So, I'm hopefully on the road to building something that doesn't have to deal with that same level of molasses or the pace of change and bureaucracy, because that's what I'm realizing is necessary.
And I think that's actually the best approach is because you can attract like-minded people who want to push in the same direction without all of the friction and bureaucracy and change resistance. Get people who want to go there, work with them, and be that change, make that happen. It's really not only the most efficient way forward. Unfortunately, it's probably maybe the only way.
I do think it's the only way, because we don't need anybody showing up and proselytizing an idea that hasn't been tested, that isn't in process.
Yeah.
The only way you're going to really validate stuff is by doing it, not just talking about it. And I do a ton of talking, but I also do a decent amount of doing as well. And it's the hardest way to do it, but I think it really is the only way it's going to get done.
Yeah, so, you're involved in the making of change and the making of buildings.
Yeah, and I'm really adopting the making of people. That's my component. Is I want to create the opportunity for more people to create their own opportunity.
Yeah, and I think ultimately, I'm very optimistic. I think there's unlimited opportunity out there.
Yeah, well,
and we can create full employment. We can make housing better, faster, cheaper. And the way to do that is having more people using the best tools and sharing that knowledge.
Right, exactly. You got to teach people how to use tools. First, that they exist, and then how to do it. So once again, I just want to thank everyone for watching, and you can follow, subscribe, and tune in next week. We'll be on episode 4 of FabCity now. And I'm not quite sure what I'll be. I'll probably be in upstate New York somewhere, and I will figure out who we're going to be chatting with next. So thank you again, and I will see you guys next week.
Thank you for your time.
All right.